Hey everyone. So I am a little bit under the weather. I do want to apologize. My voice may go up and down, in and out. I just want to apologize in advance. I also felt like I intuitively needed to do this video because it is something that I personally have experienced, struggle through, and I just want to share what I have gone through with you. So this video is primarily going to be looking at your patterns and seeing how your patterns overlap into your emotional states and your behaviors. Essentially, how your patterns create your emotional states and your behaviors. So, I do want to use this mathematical metaphor to actually relate this to you as far as your patterns. Now, we can all look back on a time where we have taken pre-algebra, algebra, calculus. Some may have taken calculus. But let's just say, for the sake of everyone, we've taken pre-algebra or some form of college algebra. So you are sitting in your classroom. Before you know anything, you look through your textbook and you see all these long equations. And you find one and you're like, how am I going to figure this out? I know within 6 months I'm eventually going to get to this chapter, but how do I figure it out? You look at it, you try to use your best insight and previous math history to break it apart, but you eventually do not get to the answer. And why we don't get to the answer is because there are formulas that are needed for this equation. And within those formulas, you have things that connect together, things that don't, and you have to match up these formulas that give you an answer. Now, why am I using a math equation? I'm using a math equation to correlate to our own patterns, to our own predominantly destructive and bad patterns. Patterns are, if we are not in tune with them and we find ourselves very reactive to life and making decisions purely based on emotional states and anger and fear and developing relationships in this way, we are unaware of our patterns. This is how I can correlate the equation to just looking at all the numbers plastered on a page. The second way I can correlate this pattern to the equation is once you figure out the formula, you know that there's some sort of solution at the end of it. Our patterns are involved with the formulas. If we look at the formulas, this means that we are aware of our patterns, yet we try to plug in the formula over and over and over again, but it hasn't clicked yet. It hasn't yet settled in, and we've gotten the wrong answer over and over and over. And you're like, how do I get this answer? Math must be wrong. This is all wrong. It must be flawed, right? This is us getting into our patterns over and over and over again, and we are producing the wrong result, the wrong emotional state, and the wrong behaviors. And how we know they are the wrong behaviors are because we result in our bad patterns, as I said before. The third math metaphor is when we can see the equation, plug in the formulas, and get the answer. This is the state where we go above our patterns and we acknowledge them. We've lived in them, we see them, yet we move on from them. We have figured out the answer. They are a part of us, but we move on. So I want to walk you step by step through the pattern process by explaining the two differences. When we look at good patterns in people, we see that they are propelling through life. Good patterns mean motivation, habits of brushing your teeth, all these exercising, all these good patterns are what push us through life. Being tenacious, being driven, never giving up, wanting to figure out that math equation over and over again, succeeding. These are all good patterns that essentially give us good results. These are patterns that we need to utilize and that we desire. However, when we go into bad patterns, we see that these patterns are intervening with our life. They are giving us emotional states that are draining, depressing, and our behaviors are following quickly after, and we don't know why we are doing them. These bad patterns are destructive towards our emotional states and our relationships and everything that's involved outside of us. So what do I mean by bad patterns? I mean that they interrupt our emotional well-being. They may sabotage our own personal growth, our inner wants to grow, and our external relationships with our friends and our family and the partners that we decide to take in or choose. We also may be trapped in them without knowing. We may be just going in through our own little patterns over and over again, and we may not be realizing it. And unfortunately, a lot of us go through them, and we don't have this break. We just think that it's a matter of circumstance and our personalities and who we are, and it's the external world. So the 4 ways that I think that we can really identify the patterns, our bad patterns, is by 1, which is questioning it, having an intuition about it. We know that if we keep on plugging an equation in and we keep on trying to figure out the formula, it's not producing the result that we want. We're somehow going to not be sitting well with it. We're going to have this weird feeling. This is where intuition comes in. Identifying your patterns is by questioning why we are doing the things that we are doing in the first place and why they are producing bad results and bad choices in our lives. The second way of identifying your pattern is the physiological push and pull tension in your body. What do I mean by push and pull conflict? I mean this uneasiness that we may get inside of our bodies when we are identifying our patterns, or when we are even going through our patterns. We see this weird, we feel this interesting tension of this is wrong, this is right, should I do this, should I not? When we can actually get outside of the tension, we find that things flow and things seem to be seamless. The tension is when we are beginning to identify our patterns. The third way is confusion. Oftentimes we feel lost with our own choices. We feel confused. We don't know how we got here. We don't know why we made the choices that we did, because chances are we are very reactive and we're emotional, and we were in this cyclical pattern of our destructive behaviors. The fourth way of identifying our pattern is that we need this sense of release. Once we get trapped into the circle of everything and our patterns, we somehow intuitively know that this isn't for us, and we need a release and we need to break away immediately, whether this be leaving a partner, our jobs, getting out of an emotional draining friendship, whatever it might be. We need a release, because somehow at this end point of our patterns, some rationalization comes in, some feelings of worth come in. The most consequential patterns are the destructive ones that leave you feeling empty, lonely, ashamed, lost, feeling worthless, feeling depressed. These are all patterns that we can shift within ourselves with mindfulness, with practice, with love and care and appreciation for ourselves, and the desire and the want to change and get out of these patterns. So how can we really free ourselves from our cycles, from our destructive habits? The first, and I think most fundamental and important one, is recognizing. When you can recognize that you are no longer a victim of whatever circumstance that you came from, when you can recognize that what you are doing is not producing the results that you want, the life satisfaction, the life fulfillment, the career that you want, because we are living in patterns that were given to us from our youth, or perhaps even adulthood, later adulthood, through traumatic experiences that we've gone through, either through a divorce, a loved one dying, our parents separating at a young age, verbal abuse, physical abuse. And the interesting thing is that when we are born, when we are conceived, let's go back that far, when we are conceived, these two strangers from who we have no relationship with, we have never seen their patterns in their lives because we are non-existent, we aren't there. Oddly enough, these two people connect and they view the world through their own lens, their coping mechanisms, the way that they handle stress, the way that they deal with other people, see their partner, treat children, treat the world, treat the environment. These are all things that they have developed throughout their lives that we have no part in yet. We are born, and all the values that our parents have learned have been brought to us. All these values that have been brought to us are unfortunately, in extreme circumstances, not necessarily good. We have beautiful and amazing parents out there, and to those parents, I just want to say thank you so much for all your love and support and care for your child to want to do well, and for all those individuals that did have a unfortunate circumstance growing up. I just want us to bring a little bit more insight into the situation of how we were brought up. So we have our parents that intuitively teach us. They don't sit down and say, this is how you should treat a man, this is how you should treat a woman, this is how you should treat an individual of another race, this is how you should talk to people. They don't sit us down and give us a lesson like they do in school. They teach us through their behaviors, through their speech, how they treat us, how they talk to us, how they view others and the world. So we develop these patterns almost innately before we can even form a language, or before we can even communicate what it is that we want, or before we can even rationalize, before we can put logic into play. We develop these patterns and these habits, and eventually we go off, we break away, we step away from them. And had they been a destructive and bad upbringing, we carry all these negative attributes and feelings and emotional states into our adulthood. And we carry them here. But when they are here, they are no longer in use. They were built in as a survival mechanism for coping with the child that you once were, for coping through that divorce, through that separation with your husband and wife, when a loved one passed away. These were all mechanisms that were in place for you, and now they have eventually turned into patterns and habits that no longer serve you. And we have to see that our patterns now are being dragged in from the past. And we have to really be aware of what we are doing to ourselves, our emotional states, and to others when we bring our emotional behaviors from the past to now. The second way of freeing yourself from patterns is to accept what has happened. Forgiveness is the best thing that you can offer yourself. It doesn't mean that the other person has to know, or it doesn't mean that you have to have a relationship with the person that did all this damage. It just means that you have accepted life circumstances that were completely out of your control. You were helpless and innocent. If you are younger, if you are older, we have to accept this and take charge. And we need to stop playing a victim. The longer that we play a victim, the less fulfilled we will be, the less happy we will become, and we will not fulfill what it is that is in our heart. We will continue to be in our cyclical patterns over and over again without recognizing what we are doing to our bodies and to our minds. The third way of freeing yourself of your pattern is to take charge. And by take charge, I mean slowly. This means if you have someone that you really turn to during times of need, or even happy moments, when you have good patterns that are rewarding you, if you have someone that you can really trust and that sits well with you, talk to them. Because I can guarantee that they will want to listen. If you have a person that is empathetic and can really understand where you're coming from and can relate, they will be more than happy to help you. Because intuitively, I think we all have this need to help one another. We all have this desire to give what we've learned, what we've experienced, to make things easier for people. Because when we personally go through pain and suffering, we've experienced it, and we no longer want our children to go through that, We no longer want others to go through that. If we are emotional and rational human beings, we don't want that pain and suffering. So find an individual that listens to you, that empathizes, and take charge. And by taking charge, this also means seeking help. Seeking help has such a negative connotation with it because we are in America, right? And we don't want any help. We are individualistic. We can get things done by ourselves. And this is true. You can get by yourself, but we can do more together. We can do so much more together. And when we reach out, we feel good. And not only when we seek help, we are seeking individuals that are trained for this. They have devoted their life, perhaps they have gone through their own suffering and pain. They have devoted their life to have no one ever again feel this way. So they are here to help you figure out a way to have a fulfilling life. It's not a shameful experience, it's a liberating one because you are not only connecting with another individual that understands you, you are opening up and you are able to spill your thoughts and your words out into the universe and make them real versus having them stuck up in your mind. So please, please take charge and speak up, speak your mind, write them down if you need to journal. The interesting thing about journaling is I've been journaling since I was like 9 years old. Now I do a lot of typing and blogging to get that emotional vent out. I've just always been an emotional creature and feeling insensitive creature. And what I find with journaling is when I type all my words out and I reread them, I sometimes reread them over and over again to find typos, but as I'm reading it, I have this weird revelation and this breakthrough and this intuitive feeling of, oh wow, now I can really see my words on paper, my feelings on paper, and I've hit a eureka. I've seen why I've done the things that I've done, and it's just like a light bulb comes off. That doesn't necessarily mean that your behaviors are going to change, but at least it's planting a seed. At least when you come to a next life situation, you can reflect on that seed that's been planted and say, oh, but I realized it at this time. This is all what therapy does. It helps you. The next way of freeing ourselves from our patterns I have found is spirituality. We all come from different belief systems of a creator, whether this be the universe, the trees, the dirt, God, whatever is your spirituality. I want you to tap into this. I personally find oneness in nature. When I go out and I watch a sunset, I feel this harmonious balance between life and animals and the sun and the earth, as if I am one, as if I am not so alone, as if everything is constant and I have meaning, I have purpose here because everything is in balance at this particular moment in time that I am in existence. It may sound ego-ridden and it may be our consciousness making sense of it, but whatever is going to make sense to you is going to help you. Isn't it really our egos and our conscious that are developing our bad patterns in the first place? Yes, they are. It's all our perception and our behaviors and our emotional states. So why not have spirituality or something outside of our own patterns to hang on to as a way of release or feeling some sort of hope or oneness or love with the universe? Why not? Because once we can learn to break away from our patterns and not get wrapped in them and connect with something else outside that is away from our inner push and pulls, we can really see two different spectrums of perceiving the world. So what are other ways of finding worth outside of your patterns? This could be through your hobbies. And what I mean by that is reading might take you outside of your pattern. Watching a short movie once in a while, educating yourself, seeking help, going outside of whatever it is that gets you so wrapped up in your destructive patterns to really engage yourself elsewhere. It doesn't mean that we are ignoring the issue. It's just training our minds and our bodies to feel a different way outside of our bad thinking and our bad actions. I do have to say that the power of the mind and your behaviors and how you treat yourself and others goes a long way. We are not a product of our environment. We are not a product of what has happened in our later adulthood. We have the capability and the power to really transcend everything that we think that we are, everything that we have identified ourselves as being bad and negative and that we can't get out of, whether this being a bad diet or lack of exercise or emotional destructive patterns, emotional eating. We can rid ourselves of these patterns if we just find ways to break them down, give them reason, and change them. I know for the longest time I personally sat in my emotions for a really, really long time, and I got so fed up and frustrated with feeling so down that I just hit a wall, and I told myself, why am I making myself feel this way? I am no longer in the environment that I once was. I am an adult now. Why do I feel so miserable? Why am I choosing the people that I do? Why am I creating the patterns that I am? And I remember specifically, I came home one day having a drink with a friend. I had one alcoholic beverage, and we know alcohol. If you are going through an emotional time, I'm going to say stay away from alcohol, because alcohol does make you feel good, but it is a downer. You are eventually going to come down. And the one thing that I can recommend, that if you have been drinking and you're in an emotionally bad state, go home and sleep. If you have 1 glass of wine, 2 glasses of wine, put that phone away, step away from your patterns and just go to sleep, because this is when we become the most vulnerable and we are the most down, because our physiology is actually changing when drinking alcohol. Anyway, as I was coming back having a glass of wine with a friend, I was sitting in my car and I just remember feeling immensely lonely. I had done everything that I wanted to do in my life. It's still a progress, but I've made all the choices that I did and ended up alone. And I remember sitting in my car thinking, this is what I chose, Sarah. Now don't sit in this for too long. Let the tears come. You need to feel it, but let it pass. Do not touch your phone. Do not reach out for immediate gratification. Do not text anyone right away, because you know that this is not genuine. This is coming from an insecure place. I literally had this inner dialogue when I was at the end of feeling my emotional patterns and behaviors, while I was becoming frustrated and I couldn't control how I was feeling. And at this point, I was going through some therapy. I think I was about a month in. And I just remember sitting there and taking charge and saying, okay, Sarah, don't sit in this for too long. Cry it all out, but you need to get out of the car. You need to get into your apartment and you need to go to bed. You need to not text anyone, and you just need to have the strength to step away. The amount of joy and power that I felt sitting and weeping for a certain amount of time, getting out of my car, going to bed, and just sleeping. And I actually think that I journaled that night, just letting everything out, and just felt so powerful for me. It was hard, and it was stepping away from the pattern that I was so used to. The immediate gratification of reaching out to someone and getting a response, filling up that loneliness and emptiness, whichever way was needed, was a cop out for me. I wasn't doing the emotional work. I wasn't sitting with the pain and the loneliness. I was going outside of myself to seek it. But let me tell you, this brought so much insight that once we can adapt ourselves into our new environment, we find tremendous results. And this is one example that I share with you, actually sitting in my pattern and seeing it, recognizing it, feeling the emotional pain, but still telling my brain that this is only temporary. You need to get yourself out of it. You need to go to bed. It'll all be over. And in that, I found that I stopped my patterns. I stopped my patterns of crying endlessly for no reason, stopped my patterns of reaching out whenever I felt lonely. And there is so much strength to be found within that. So thank you so much for watching, everyone. I hope you found this video useful. Like I said, please leave comments or your feedback to what has helped you. I really, really love hearing all of your words and your thoughts. It's what drives me. So thanks so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Bye, everyone.